So this last year I had a couple clients out west, a guy in southern Idaho. We had some issues with scopes on their rifles, their knowledgeability about scopes and using it in the field. So I wanted to do a short video, hopefully short. The biggest thing that we've seen is guys who are bringing out these BDC scopes, having the BDC reticles in there where they, the manufacturers, they sit there and they tell you that the line, the first line is good for 200 yards and 300 yards, 4 or 5, whatever. And they're putting them on these high-powered hunting rifles, and they're going out in the field, and they think they zero it at 200 yards or 100 yards, and that each one of those lines is automatically on. The problem is, and I've looked into at least the Nikon website a little bit, that is not necessarily the case. They're using, with Nikon at least, a 22-250 to set up that ballistic reticle. Not very many people go deer hunting or elk hunting with a 22-250. In fact, a lot of states it's illegal to even use a 22 caliber on those animals. So that's half the problem with the BDC scopes that I found. The other issue is its second focal plane, which just about every scope out there is second focal plane. There are some first focal plane scopes that are coming out on the market. Some have been there for a while. They're usually your more like your long range precision sniper scopes, things like that. But even with your mildots and your MOA and your BDC scopes, the value changes between the dots changes with each power setting. So if, like with the Nikon BDC scope, I'm just going to use that as an example because that's what I was familiar with. The value at 4 power is significantly different than the value at 12 or 16 power. And this one particular client that I had, we had a bull elk at 509 yards. He was laying out prone, had a good rest, and his bullets were just flying over the top of this thing. I'm like, what is going on? That's when I looked into it. Well, he was shooting at 4 power and using his 500-yard pin, or what he thought was his 500-yard pin. Well, come to find out, if you go on their website at 4 power, that pin or line is actually set for about 999 yards. So he was quite literally launching these bullets 4 to 8 feet over this animal's back. And after 3 rounds, the bull just walked off. And unfortunately, we weren't able to get back onto it. And for some reason, he couldn't get onto it. And I think 12 power was his maximum on that particular scope. Next day, we went on to a different area, got back on the same bull as well as 2 other ones. And I won't say it's the same issue, but I'm going to assume it's a similar issue since I wasn't sitting right next to him. But he ended up missing the same bull 10 more times in about a 10 or 12 minute period using this BDC scope. And the poor guy, he's been on hunts before, dull sheep and some other ones, and was successful, but all of the shots were at closer range, I think under 200 yards. So all these manufacturers are advertising that these are good long-range scopes. Unless you understand or really understand these scopes, they're really not as good as what they're being advertised as. One of the issues is the value between the dots change with each power setting. And with the BDC scopes, they change in between each of the dots. So like I said, your first dot is 100 or 200 yards, and your second one, they say, is 300. Well, the drop that they have that set for does not match up to your rifle and your round. There's a million different rifle and round combinations out there. This is only set up for one. And, with Nikon, a 22-250 with, I believe, a 50 or 55 grain bullet, which is going to be an incredibly hot load and very flat shooting out of that rifle, which, your 270s, your .6s, even your 300 Win Mags aren't going to have that same trajectory. They're going to be a little, not quite as flat, we'll say that. So you got your power setting difference, which changes the value in between each of your dots, or at the range, and then you got your distance between each of the dots that gets bigger the lower down they go. So those two are, they'll throw you off in the field, basically. even if you go on to a MOA or a mildot, particularly the mildot scopes in the second focal plane, and I believe I haven't played with the MOAs in second focal plane, but I'm going to assume that they're the same. The value in between those with the different power settings, if you go from say 4 power to 12 power, that's going to be a different value in between your dots. So at 100 yards, it's going to be 3.6 inches between those two dots on a mildot. If you're at 10 power, with my research, everything has been related to 10 power in these mildot scopes as far as the value. But if you go out farther and then go to like say 16 power, that value all of a sudden changes. My wife and I had issues with that this summer. We were target practicing out at our house. We both have mildot scopes, and she couldn't hit the target, and she was using it on a mid-level power setting on her rifle. I sighted her rifle in on, I think it was 16 power. I said, you know what? I said, crank it all the way up to 16 power and try shooting there. From there on, she kept hitting the target. We were shooting about 300 yards, and she hit it every time after that. And I had the same problem with my 300 Win Mag. I would try shooting at a lower setting using that same mildot that I ordinarily use, or the same drop, and I wouldn't hit the target. And I couldn't understand what was going on. And if I turned it up to 16 power, I'd hit the target every time. So those are some of the disadvantages of the BDC in the second focal plane. I just did a video on the Vortex Diamondback, which is a first focal plane scope. I'm not going to go back into that one. But the advantages of the first focal plane is that the value always stays the same between your lines. You don't have to worry about it getting bigger or smaller. It's always, now granted, it's going to be at an angle going out, especially like with the MOA. I was watching some videos on that the other day, since I'm not familiar with it. But you don't have to worry about the power setting, because the reticle itself gets closer, or in your case, gets closer. You guys watching this thing, so that the EBR2C reticle, when you have it on 4 power, you know, it just looks like this. And then when you get on 16, you're way up close to it, which is a really cool thing. You know, it kind of feels like you're a sniper, which is fun. But you don't have to do all that on the fly math, worry about what your power setting is like you do on the second focal plane scopes, whether it's mildot, BDC, whatever. The great thing about the first focal plane scopes, they're usually a higher end manufacturer and scope. You're not going to find them for $100. It's not going to be some cheap scope. You know, that Diamondback I just mentioned, that's pretty much the bottom of the barrel on the first focal plane, and that's a $350 scope. It only goes up from there. You can get into $2,000 or $3,000 first focal plane scopes, which are crazy. The great thing too about those, a lot of them aren't just your, you know, post crosshair, duplex, whatever. They've got a really well thought out reticle. I had a Horus Vision Hawk scope with the H425. Great reticle, love that scope. Broken down and subtended into 0.2 mils, both for elevation and windage. Leopold has the Tremor 2, I believe it is, and maybe even the Tremor 3 reticle. I don't like that one personally as much, but again, the thought process behind that one is very good, where they've got the windage marks, and it kind of looks like a triangle. It's a little bit weird, but it goes out, and it's for every 4 mile an hour for the wind, which like I said, I haven't used that one, but it seems to be working quite well for the guys that are using it. And so it's a good idea to get in on some of that stuff. So I hope this helps you guys out as far as maybe a scope selection or different ideas, makes you aware at the very least of some of the issues that you might come up with using a BDC reticle scope or second focal plane scope. If you have a first focal plane scope, well, you guys got it going on. So I hope you guys have a good one out there, and happy hunting.